hello to everyone who just arrived. You may still be able to see a poll, but I'm still going to continue to admit a few. Great. Okay. So with 6:01, almost on German time, I'm going to start. I think to maybe just to say like one word or so for Kim, for like your context, the daily sanity preservers are salons that we started now almost over 2 weeks ago. They used to run twice a day. Now they're about one a day, and we're still trying to see whether we're going to stick with the morning or evening. And they're kind of focused on three things: building community, surfacing projects or people that are good at sense making about COVID-19 and projects that need support. And then thirdly, and a little bit more ambitiously, perhaps thinking about kind of like the crisis at large, how to respond best, how we can use this crisis to kind of like prep us and make civilization itself a little bit more resilient, kind of to set it up for future challenges. And so I think today we're going to do, I'm probably going to try to scrape at that third goal. I'm terribly excited to have you here. I think I read your bio a few times and still I had to like reread and repass every sentence because I think there's like there's only like I guess a few areas which you haven't touched in your work in terms of crisis response. I think anything from I think like troubles with setting up like emerging democracies to natural disasters. You work with the Red Cross, so I think it's really like quite an extensive and very interesting CV. A lot of I think coordination between very different actor types involved. I'm hoping that we learn some of that today. From really on the ground work to kind of like really high level leadership building. And I think really there's everything in it. To of course public communication. You're currently leading the Center for Leadership Development at the Defense Language Institute Foreign Language Center for the U.S. Department of Defense in Monterey. But you've worked before with NATO, the OSCE, the DoD, Red Cross, and really all across the world. I'm going to post your more extensive bio in the chat so people can look up on it. My hope for this is that folks have a chance to kind of read some of your bio while you speak, perhaps if they haven't done so. And then after you're done with your introduction, we can maybe use the bio a little bit as almost like a launch pad from which to kind of like query you a little bit more about kind of like sharing some of the experiences that you had. And maybe even though you told me a crisis is a crisis and really just one crisis, perhaps we can even go to the stretch goal and try to see if there's any useful lessons to draw from your previous experience for COVID-19 and for future disaster response and communication around it. Okay, cool. I'll be posting your bio. I think amazing. Welcome. I'll be posting your bio. For now, the stage is yours. I will be collecting questions in the chat, and then after you're done, we can kind of like start a little bit more of an informal conversation. But for now, I'm terribly excited to have you here, and I can't wait for what you're going to share. Welcome.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction, Allison. I really appreciate that. I was also thinking as I was preparing for this, I was talking, when I wrote that bio or copied the pieces of it, I was mostly thinking about the work I've done in public affairs and with governments and things like that. And I did not mention that I've also got a pretty extensive background in science communication. I worked as a communicator I worked as a communicator in the U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal Highway Administration's Research Laboratory. I was the chief of research communication there. That was before I went to Afghanistan. And I've also worked for the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the National Science Foundation, and the University of Georgia in the Office of Public Affairs. I was there for 10 years. So yeah, I've been around.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So a lot of questions are popping up already.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting talk. But I'm watching all of this unfolding from this perch here in Monterey, and I'm not involved in the COVID-19 response. So I'm, maybe that's a good thing right now, to be just be able to take a breath and, just watch it all. But I was thinking about, what's going on. And as I was just this afternoon, I was, had all these balls in the air and doing all my work, and my mom called. My mom's on the East Coast, and she said, she said, I'm watching the news and I'm scared. And I said, so I barked at her and I said, so turn off the news. And then she said, well, I'm just being a mom. And so that was her way of saying, I'm embarrassed that I'm watching the news and I'm scared and I've called you and I can tell that I'm bothering you, but I really just want someone to say it's okay. And so, after that sunk in, I of course called my mom back and I said, I'm sorry for barking at you. And then I really, as I started thinking about it some more, I thought, my mom is like Joe every person or Joanne every person. There are so many people out there who do watch the news. We're all very interested in what's happening. And we're being inundated with all of this information. Like that's the business of the media. And then, back when I first started as a communicator, there were gatekeepers and formal media outlets that we had to try to convince to tell our stories. But nowadays it's, we mostly communicate through social media, which means everybody's got the power to communicate to everybody. We don't have to go through, the major media outlets anymore. There's good and bad to that. The good is that, we can hear from so many different perspectives and we hear so many different voices. We can get information right from the source, not filtered through a media outlet. But the bad part is like, everybody's got an opinion and everyone's free to broadcast it. So we can't tell what is good and true and right and just, and sometimes people don't know what to think, people like my mom and me and all of us, I suppose. So I was thinking also, like, what do I want to say? Some of the crises and disasters I've worked in, have been interesting and significant in many different ways. The conversation I was having with Allison earlier, I was talking about having worked as one of the first, I was in the first wave of volunteers that responded to Hurricane Harvey back in, I think it was 2017. And we've got a saying in the Red Cross, and it says, we say, if you've responded to one disaster, or if you've seen one disaster, you've seen one disaster, which is to say they're all different. Of course, there are some best practices and some common understandings about how to communicate and the way people understand things and how we can move opinions and build trust and inform people. But every case is different when you get like down to it. So I can also look at folks who are in the middle of this crisis right now, and I wonder, what would I do? And I can judge them as a professional, and then I can also be compassionate and sympathetic and say, I don't know what I would do because I'm not behind those closed doors and I don't know. And very often, when we see the stories, I've seen it so many times, when we see what actually gets broadcast in the media through social media or through traditional media, the story that finally gets put up there is only, a sliver of what is really happening. As a media consultant and public affairs strategist, I have sat with many, many, many spokespersons and subject matter experts, and they say, like, I talked to that reporter for an hour. How come I only got 2 sentences in the story? Like, that's not necessarily time wasted, because you're framing the conversation. You're helping to educate that reporter who is the voice to share the information with others. So, you are still influencing the story, but just not necessarily with your words in the headlines. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. I'm not sure what would be most helpful or what people are looking for. I can tell stories all day long about what it was like in Afghanistan, or what it was like in Hurricane Harvey, or in Myanmar in 2018.
Yeah,
right?
perhaps. I mean, I think everyone, will probably have their own questions, but perhaps you could take us like, maybe like kind of like almost chronologically, kind of like through your career with like a few high points of where you think that, you've learned a bit that actually stuck with you.
All right, that's easy. Sure, thanks for the prompt. So I knew how much I wanted to, I knew in 6th grade I wanted to be a journalist. And then I graduated from undergraduate school, and they didn't have a journalism degree. So I ended up going to I learned how to say, I got an undergraduate degree in liberal arts, and my colleagues or my classmates always used to say, what do you do with a liberal arts degree? Liberal arts degrees are very valuable. I'll say that in my defense, but we always said you either go to grad school or you learn how to say, would you like fries with that? So, so I went to grad school, and I knew I wanted to be in communications. So I said either New York or LA, and LA was farther from home and LA was sunny. So I went to the University of Southern California, to the Annenberg School there for my master's degree. And I got involved in corporate communications, doing corporate public relations for the first 10 years of my career, and launched multi-million-dollar products for multi-billion-dollar companies, and even got involved in a $2.83 billion work stoppage for General Motors when they were the largest company in the world. After that, I started to feel like a prostitute for shareholders. So the University of Georgia offered me a job as the national media coordinator. And so I didn't know I was getting into science communication, but that's what I did. I had moved back home to Michigan, and I could say to anyone who's contemplating it, never move from Southern California to Michigan. That's not a good move. But after 3 years in Michigan, moved down south to Atlanta, or I thought I was aiming for Atlanta, and ended up in Athens, Georgia, working for the University of Georgia. And I stayed there for 10 years. And in the process, I got married. I met a man who was a National Guardsman. And we got engaged 2 months after we met, also not a recommended course of action. But we got engaged in August of 2001. And in September of 2001, of course, September 11th happened, and then he immediately got deployed to Guantanamo Bay, and I was left wondering what I was getting myself into, my married life and military life. So I went and pursued a PhD for something to do in my free time, and then after that time at the University of Georgia. My job, I left a secure state funded job for a grant funded job, and that grant ran out. And one of my friends said to me, well, they're looking for, he said they're looking for people to do communications in Afghanistan. And even though I had done media relations for 10 years, I got scared, and I withdrew from a job for which I was a finalist. I would have been working for the State Department at the embassy in Kabul, leading media around in Afghanistan, and I didn't want to go. And as soon as I withdrew from that job, I regretted it. So I continued to talk to my friend, and he said, well, how would you like to move to Washington? He said, we really could use people like you here. And so I aimed for Washington, and I got a job with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and helped run their Science and Technology Policy Fellowship for a year. And then the Department of Transportation, it was not really a good fit. It was a really overwhelming job. And then the Department of Transportation called and said, we'd basically like to have you do the same thing you did for the university, but we're gonna pay you $20,000 more than AAAS is. And so I thought, well, let me think about that. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then, and so I went to become the Chief of Research Communication for the Federal Highway Administration. And that was fine, but they had a public relations division, and they didn't really have any experience with someone who had done extensive media relations. So I wasn't allowed to quote scientists or talk to any media, which makes doing media relations and telling good news stories really difficult. So I continued to talk to my friend, and he said, he said, I'm going through a divorce, and I really just need to get out of Dodge for a while, reset things. He said, I'm going to Afghanistan. And he said, are you still interested in Afghanistan? And I said, actually, I am. My PhD is in adult education. And this job he was telling me about would have been, I ended up getting it. I was the Chief Strategic Communications Advisor to the Afghan National Security Forces. So it was really perfect because I was doing the strategic communication that I had been doing for 20 some years, but then I was also an advisor. And so that was the perfect combination of both my master's degree and my PhD. And
could you maybe explain a little more, like what did that involve? Because that job title sounds kind of crazy.
It sounds like a really intimidating title. So my job was really doing on-the-job training with senior leaders in the Afghan National Army. I was first hired to help the Army. And, you know, I sort of sold myself. I remember in the interview, they said, well, you know, do you have any experience with the military? And I said, well, I'm a former spouse of a National Guardsman during, you know, right after September 11th. So I have that experience. And then, and they said, okay, so how do you feel about working in a war zone? I'm working in an austere environment. And I said, well, I love camping. I've peed in the woods before. And the person who hired me reminded me later on that I actually said in a job interview that, yeah, I've got experience because I peed in the woods. But, you know, it was the end. It was the very end of Operation Enduring Freedom, which was the longest NATO mission in history. This was in 2013 that I started, in January of 2013. And so they were, maybe good for me, they were looking for just about anybody who had a pulse. So it was a really tremendous experience. And again, you know, I'd like to think I was not just someone who had a pulse. I was also bringing some really good skills to the game. And I think they knew that because not only was I didn't know this when I had 3 months of training in Washington, D.C., and then I went overseas. And when I arrived, I thought I was going to be doing, you know, hand-holding and on-the-job training with generals, which, you know, I'd advised CEOs and corporate executives and world-class scientists and thought leaders from all over the place. And so that wasn't really intimidating to me. I'm like, that sounds like fun. That sounds great. I get to be, you know, I get to be in the game. The part that was really surprising was 3 days after I landed in country, my chief of staff, who was a Canadian Army colonel, took me aside and he said, Kim, we need to go have some tea. Okay. And he said, the communications function in the Afghan Army is broken and we want you to fix it. And I said, but sir, I don't know anything about the Army. And he said, but you're a scientist, so go figure it out. And I said the only thing that I really could at that point, and that was, yes, sir. So in addition to my regular day-to-day advising duties, I also had the task of doing an organizational analysis and making some conclusions to share with what I also didn't know at the time, with the Minister of Defense, who is the counterpart to the US Secretary of Defense and reported directly to President Karzai. So it ended up being a pretty big and intimidating job if I thought about it too much. But it was all stuff I was equipped to do. I set out to do this analysis like a researcher, like a scientist, like I had been trained to do. I'm a qualitative researcher. And so I did, you know, interviews and observations and document analysis and asked questions and pleaded ignorance. They told me, they brought me in as an outsider, as a, you know, non-military person to bring change. And so that's what I did. I went with my big boss, who was a 3-star general, and met with the Minister of Defense and said, sir, I've done my study and I think that, you know, you need to reorganize there's organizational dysfunction, there's training remediation that needs to be done. And most of all, your messages are not the Afghan government's messages are not aligned with the international community, and the international community is funding this war, and you're losing the trust and faith of the international community. So we need to get that straight. And my, well, the organizational analysis was that there was a 2-star general in charge of their public affairs office. And in 2010, the United States had created an independent office of a directorate of strategic communication. And so that a 2-star general is not going to listen. That office was led by a colonel, and he's not going to listen to a colonel. So, so that's what I did. Go ahead.
Did you see any changes, kind of like spiral through the organizations then?
Yeah, absolutely. So for better or worse, you know, my plan was given the blessing, and then And then I had to implement it. And I had 2 people on my staff. And one was insubordinate because he didn't want to listen to a female, a non-military female. And then, and one was like, he didn't have the background that we needed. And so I was like, well, what do I do? So I ended up building better relationships with our NATO counterparts. And that ended up being a blessing. So working with my NATO counterpart, who was a full current U.S. full colonel, is that what I want to say? One step below a general, and he and I created alliances and teams so I could use his manpower in order to implement this plan. And then the other thing was, like, I was also getting a lot of pushback from the coalition with the ideas I had, and so the blessing in that was, you know, I'd go to sit with my mentee, General Afzal Hobi-Barakman, and I'd say, you know, sir, I can't just go and, you know, ask for another up-armored Humvee like other people can. And we're running out of money. That's one thing. We don't know what's going to happen. The President Karzai is refusing to sign the bilateral security agreement and status of forces agreement. So if he doesn't sign that, we're going to have the zero option, which is a complete withdrawal, and we're going to pull out like we did in Iraq 2 years ago. This was in 2013. And you know, we're not going to bring in a whole bunch of new equipment for you. And so I said, so what I suggest, sir, is that you stand up in front of your own army. You know, we had been saying as the coalition, we're not here to imperialize, we're not here to colonize, we're here to help the Afghans run their own sovereign nation. So I said, sir, you stand up in front of your own army. I'll tell you why I think what I do. You can tell me if it makes sense to you. We can talk about whether these ideas that I have will work or not, and you can tell me what will make them culturally relevant and salient, and go take credit for them. And he did. And he got promoted from colonel to general in the time I was working with him. And he understood why I was doing what I was doing and why I was saying what I was saying. And his ideas influenced the direction that things went. And so in the course of it, it was really an educational project. And then it was also a lot more sustainable than many of the advising missions of my colleagues, because he took ownership of it and he was able to implement things well beyond my departure. Congress changed funding for external experts like me, and I was only there for 11 months, boots on the ground. So the things I heard from others, military personnel who I knew who had gone back there and said, yeah, he was still doing a lot of the things we had talked about. And he had a lot of questions. It was really, you know, the educator in me was just perfect for that person. Because, you know, he'd say things like, well, you know, here's an example. A coalition helicopter crashed shortly after I arrived. And he said, I said, sir, are you going to say anything about this helicopter crash? Because 6 service members died and it was a mechanical failure. And he said, why should I say anything about that? He had been trained under the Soviets to keep his head low and not do or say anything. And so I said, well, sir, the Taliban is saying something. They're saying, we shot those infidels out of the sky. And I said, you're coming up on the second democratic presidential elections in your country's history and the possible complete withdrawal of coalition troops. So is the message that you want your people to believe that the Taliban shot those infidels out of the sky and you have nothing to say about it? And he said, no, I think maybe I should say something. Good idea, sir. Why don't we do that? And so, you know, there were those kind of effects. I can answer questions.
Yeah,
sorry?
No, this is great. And by the way, if anyone would like to ask something, I posted in the chat that feel free to ask there, and then I'll funnel you a question in. You said you were there for 11 months.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I'm happy that I can talk for hours about, you know, having the adventure that was Afghanistan, but I wanted to, you know, also share some more of those crises, disasters, international or work experience.
Yeah, please.
And then, you know, when people can ask about more things if they want to.
Yeah, let's move on to the next crisis.
Yes. So after I got back from Afghanistan, I went to work for the National Science Foundation, and it was really hard to come back. And so I was the lead person in the communications office working on the social sciences directorate. And that was fine for a few months, but I really needed to get out of Washington. So I loaded up my dog in my minivan and we drove around the country for a year. We were at Graceland on the anniversary of Elvis's death, and a reporter from the Memphis the Memphis Commercial Appeal, she said to me, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm not really an Elvis fan, was just really kind of passing through town. And she said, what about him? What about him? I said, oh, he ain't nothing but a hound dog. And so we ended up on the front page of the paper with that quote, because he's a wiener dog. So, anyway,
Dachshund in German. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. May I maybe funnel 3 questions in?
Okay.
The wiener dog. So we have 3 questions, and you can kind of decide in which order you take them.
Okay.
Josh is asking, how do you think the Space Force will alter how the DoD works in regards to space, but also viruses? Then how would you address the current chain of command with respect to the messaging around COVID-19?
Thanks,
And
Steve.
from David, you've dealt with such diverse people and organizational types. What's it been like for you and others where leadership prizes personal loyalty over principled management and or competence?
Yeah, that I don't know anything about the Space Force, so I'm sorry I can't really provide any sort of enlightenment on that. Yeah, I don't know anything about that one, Josh. So Steve, the current chain of command with respect to the messaging around COVID-19. This is, I was thinking, this is a question I was thinking about, the whole mom question. Like, people are so hungry. I'm talking to my mom one day, and she said, I forgot what it was. It was something I was involved in, and she said, oh, they should do something. Like, they need to tell us. And I said, Mom, like, who do you think they is? Like, they is we. Like, I'm they. People, we're human beings. We do the best with what we can, especially when you're working in science. Speaking of Foresight Institute kind of stuff, the response to this virus is bleeding edge. We don't have the answers. We don't know what we're dealing with. And so I think the people who are trying to engender trust and shape behaviors are sharing the information they have, and it's changing. So that's confusing to people, especially, when they expect to get, the truth with a capital T, or, they expect that just because you're a leader of a country or a scientist that you have the answers. And it's unfolding. This is a, dynamic process. So,
maybe I can, David, maybe you can unmute yourself to ask your question. If that answered yours, Steve, and maybe we can afterwards come back to it. But David, do you want to go?
Sure. I've had my own experiences with essentially organizations that are run like courts in the traditional monarchical sense. Mm-hmm. And my hunch is, listening between the lines, that you have also dealt with organizations that deviate far from the norms of bureaucratic rules, principles, administrative efficiency, and that sort of thing. And I'm wondering what it's been like for you, since often in those systems, you also get a kind of gross form of patriarchy as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, of course.
But I mean, I've had trouble communicating to others what a court system is really like. I bet you have such interesting comparative organizational experience. You've had a way to articulate and think about those experiences. I'd love to hear about that.
I don't know. I'm going to give you the answer that's coming to my mind. And that is, I'm thinking about when I first arrived at DLI. They gave me an org chart and they said, here's the organization, here's where you are, here's who you report to, and here's the, how it works. And I spent the next, 3-4 weeks, next month, and then, onward, going, I get this is the org chart. I'm certain that's not the power structure. And so that chart, which doesn't exist because no one would dare put something like that down on paper, is really what matters. And so to the degree, I would say to anyone who's doing this kind of work, it's imperative to find out who the power brokers really are in the organization and how things get done. And then as a communicator, I think of, where are their priorities, where are their loyalties, and then how do they transmit that information to the constituent audiences, and what do they want out of those folks? So that's a dynamic that really, will affect the outcomes of, whatever work is being done. When you think about who they are, what they want, what makes them tick, and then how that message is delivered, and then how those audiences react and respond. And that's, that's moving public opinion, or public, whatever those publics are.
Right. So, thank you.
I was just saying,
David's
the real question is, where does the power lay? And then that's the mechanism you need to manipulate or affect. Manipulate sounds so, evil. But that's affect that power, that structure, not necessarily the one that's on the org chart paper.
All right, next one up we had Alyssa. Now we have questions pouring in really. Alyssa, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure. So I've never been to Afghanistan, but reading reports from, soldiers that came back and, U.S. military and contractors and so on, they describe it as just, there's communication sort of within the army and within the government. But when you got out to average citizens, no one was communicating to them. They had no idea what was going on. They thought that the U.S. Army were the Russians. They didn't know what 9/11 was. Fighters would fly overhead, and they thought that it was some kind of mutant new bird because they didn't know what a fighter jet was. Does that match your experience, or is this just selection bias, or people reporting things because they sound like good stories?
Probably some of both. But there was the. I've got a book over on my bookshelf there, but the literacy rate in Afghanistan is extremely low. And there are even many places where where they relied on other mechanisms of communication. So I have another story. Someone told me that some brilliant, I think British general, promised the Minister of Defense a TV station. And he was really excited about that because the TV stations in Kabul had been censoring his messages, the minister's messages. And I had done my dissertation at a commercial TV station in Georgia, and I had seen former NBC executives at the University of Georgia run that station into the ground after the university bought it from the private company. And so I knew that if former NBC executives couldn't run a TV station decently, then certainly the Afghan military wasn't going to do a good job. And I had also been working with them, as an advisor. So I said, this is a really, really, really bad idea. I said this to the coalition folks, and they said, well, we're not going to tell them we're not going to take a TV station. You go convince them they don't want a TV station. So I went and talked to the folks, the Afghan Public Affairs Office, and I said, so got a TV station, great. What are you guys going to do with that TV station? And they said, well, we want to, share our messages all over. TV's a great thing. I said, so who are you going to communicate with? And they said, oh, the contested areas in the south and the east. Great. Do those people have TVs? Do those people even have electricity? Yeah, no. So we had to think of how do we communicate with people who can't read, who don't even have the mechanisms of communication that we traditionally rely on, don't understand what's happening. It was almost like, taking all that wisdom, knowledge, experience, and having to replay it in an entirely different game. Like I said about the disasters, if you've seen one disaster, you've seen one disaster. And I guess that's, for me, that's kind of what makes it fun, because it's a new game every time. But in Afghanistan, it really was different. Finally, I said to General Habib, where do these people get their information? How do they make decisions? Because that's what we have to affect. That's our lever. Like, that's where we need to make change. And he said, you know, honestly, the uneducated people out in the country, he said, they listen to their mullahs and their imams. Fine, great. Now we know, and we need to go talk to the folks over in religious affairs. That's how we got the message out to those people. But it's, you know, as someone who's, you know, working for General Motors or for Symantec Corporation, which I had done, I would have never thought go talk to the mullahs and imams. So, but I did know that, like I was saying to David, you have to find out who controls the power and who controls the information, who the audiences are and how they make their decisions, and then affect that. And that's where you can get some real traction and make a difference.
All right, thank you. And we have next one up, Shanna, who had a question.
Yeah, thank you. So this is based on you mentioning that you were having predictions of how people would perceive messaging. How do you predict the messaging that's going to kind of stick to people in the long run about COVID, especially in the United States?
Yeah.
The messaging coming from, you know, at least the federal government, it's very disjointed and chaotic, and they don't seem to have any strategy. But a year or two from now, when people look back, what will they really remember? What will people stick with?
You know, one of my friends asked me yesterday or the day before, she's got a 3-year-old and she's been like sheltering at home in North Carolina. And she said, you know, a lot of people, like, are you getting anything, or what's going to happen to us? How long is this going to last? And I thought, I'm watching the same news as everybody else. But what I see is it's going to be bad. And people, you know, people aren't taking it seriously. I'm going to get to your question, but I'm thinking that, you know, the same people who are saying I need to hoard toilet paper and rice because end days are coming are the ones who go, well, you know what, I'm going to go meet my friends down at the beach. Like, are you afraid or are you not afraid? I think people don't know what to think. And so the message that will finally get through, I think, is when it hits home, when it affects someone that you know, then you start listening. Or when you know, like thinking of my mom, when it gets so bad that you know, something's got to grab our attention, because right now I think there's a lot of people, particularly in America, who are just going on the way that they went on because right now it's just this, you know, yeah, I get it, I'm not allowed to go to the grocery store, but it hasn't really affected me. And I'm afraid that, you know, until it's real for us, then it's just, you know, it's just out there. We've seen this happen before. You know, with so many things. I'm thinking about, you know, climate change. I know there are still people who deny climate change, but it isn't until we've finally been able to actually see things with our own eyes that go, oh, wait a minute, this is a real thing.
All right. I think, you know, that by necessity almost will happen in the next few weeks to months, I think.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So, okay, we have next one up. We have Mike and then Steve.
Hi, Kimberly. Mike here. I was just wondering, based on your observations, you know, being boots on the ground in foreign countries, did you really see any value or effectiveness of the U.S. even being there, involved, or having a military there? Was it accomplishing anything?
I'm looking at who's in the audience. One of my colleagues is here, Pete. Hi, Pete. I think it made a difference. Yeah, I think we made a difference. Unfortunately, I don't think it was executed in the best way. But, you know, when I look at, I think we needed to have an end game before we went in, and we needed to get out a lot sooner than we did. But did we make life better for a lot of Afghans? Absolutely. And have they learned a lot and moved the society forward? They did, and they've also lost a lot of ground after we ended Operation Enduring Freedom. When we went to resolute support, I'm not sure that I wish they could have held on to a lot of the advances we made. I can talk more about that, but
yeah, if you have some suggestions, what could be changed to improve things? I know there's other people in the queue here too, but I'd always be interested in hearing, what can be done to improve the outcomes.
What can be done to improve the outcomes now in Afghanistan, or what could be done to improve the outcomes if something like this happens again?
Yeah, in general, yeah, not even just Afghanistan, but other places too, that if there's ways to improve the outcomes, because they just seem to go on and on without anything really being accomplished.
Not always and not traditionally, but like this COVID thing, I think we're entering a new, well, I shouldn't draw parallels to that. Afghanistan was a new way of fighting wars. We were doing asymmetrical warfare. We had questions when we went in and we said, like, does the Geneva Convention even apply? Because we're not fighting a uniformed enemy. So, what happens if we get captured? Do they have to treat us like a POW? That's a scary question. So I think just like, I was saying about being on the frontiers of science, that was also, a different frontier. We, the leaders, are also answering different kinds of questions. Like, we don't know what it's going to be like when there's a declared fighting season. You don't know if your farmer neighbor is going to come after you when, March 31st comes.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we, the leader, the decision makers, were necessarily prepared for all of the things we encountered. I don't know if they could have been. So, maybe one thing we could do is try to get the best intelligence we can and act on that. You could also argue we think we did that. In retrospect, like Allison was saying, you often don't understand the story until you look back on it. In retrospect, did they have weapons of mass destruction? Was that a reason to go in? Were we just being reactionary because they blew up our World Trade Center and killed thousands of Americans, and damn it, we don't stand for that? And is that the wrong stance? These are all questions I think that we can talk about. Like, my opinion is they did the best they could with what they had, and I don't know if it was necessarily the right thing. But that was then. This is now.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Next one up, we have David Shaw on a question on Norm Augustine's work. David, do you maybe want to go? And also, in case Kim doesn't know Norm Augustine, do you want to say a few words about who he is and why you think his theory of crisis management is relevant?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Allison. Are you familiar with Norm Augustine?
Mm-mm.
So he, I think he was with Lockheed Martin. I'm not sure if he's still alive or not, but he wrote some really important papers on crisis management. And they're relevant when he did them. They're relevant now. They cross over all sorts of uses. And it generally revolves around peeling the Band-Aid off immediately. As awful as something may be, as bad as the news may be, is you've got to address it head on, do it immediately, and have full transparency and kind of lay out the steps you're going to try to do to remedy the situation. And it's just amazing how often you see different events come up, whether it's a corporate event or whether it's a policy move or whatever it is, where people do the exact opposite. And you kind of see the cascading problems created by it. So it's really interesting. I would encourage anybody to go look him up. His name's Norm Augustine, and I don't know, he probably wrote those papers, I don't know, 30 years ago. It's been a while.
I'm not familiar with his work, but what you attributed to him is classic crisis communication response. But as you said, so many people who are communicators don't heed that. So
he's pretty famous in the government and military circles.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with him particularly, but that approach is pretty standard and classic.
I mean, I think immediately of this recent event with the ship and the captain who got removed, and then the Secretary of the Navy went out and basically made the exact same mistake he did, talking to the crew of the ship, and it's like, you know, have these guys got clue about anything? It's really strange.
Yeah, I've got some notes that I was, if I was going to make a slide, that I was going to put on the slide, but there are 7 considerations that I had collected. They are: first, accept and involve the receiver of risk communication as a legitimate partner. That's your audience. You have to accept that they're part of this equation. You can't just talk at people. Second, plan and tailor risk communication strategies. Again, if you've responded to one disaster, you've responded to one disaster. Everyone's different, and you can plan. Third, listen to your audience. Know what people are saying, know what they understand is good and true and right, what's important to them, and speak to that. Be honest, frank, and open. Coordinate and collaborate with other credible sources. Like we see these task forces, especially with the COVID-19 response and in many other things. Plan for media influence. Speak clearly and with compassion. As the spokesperson, you have to be likable. So those are also some of the same things that that you had mentioned about, especially being clear and responding quickly.
Right, thank you. I think next one up we have Steve with a question, and then anyone can join the queue if they'd like.
Hi, Kim. It's lovely to see you again.
Good to see you.
I had a couple of interrelated questions. One was a follow-up to my previous question, and you don't answer one or both or neither. One was, do you or have you or are you going to address the current chain of command with regard to COVID-19 messaging? It's such a mess at the moment. Mm-hmm. And also it's sort of a personal question about your coming up, which is, how has the early idea of going into journalism influenced your perspective on communication with the chain of command, your problem-solving decisions, and your impact on decision makers?
I'm not sure what you mean by that second one.
Sure. So you talked about early on going into journalism, yeah?
Yeah, but I never did it. I failed.
Yeah. No, well, I don't know that you failed in it because you're really a good communicator, which is to a large extent what journalism is about. So I think. So I'm wondering how that might have influenced your own messaging, if it has or hasn't.
My own messaging about what?
The way you operate in the world and work with your clients.
Yeah, the story I tell about myself.
Well, not so much the story you tell about yourself, but the story you tell about the things you're involved with when you're trying to, for instance, influence your superiors.
Yeah. It's still communication. Like journalism is just like the application of the principles. But as a strategic communicator, it's still, I'm thinking of that. I forgot, I'm horrible with the theorists, but that model from, I think it was the 1930s or 1940s, where it's, the message or sender, message, and receiver, that good old fashioned, like we all do that. But then, like I was saying to David earlier, you have to figure out, there's that, like that's the very, very, very basis of it. But then you also have to figure out, like, who are the stakeholders and what do they believe and where do they get their information? And, journalists do all of this too. And how are you going, how do you get them from here to there? Are you looking to build trust, or are you looking to change behaviors or change attitudes, or, you know, are you looking to educate them? There's, you know, there was I remember in grad school we talked about, you know, communication either educates, informs, or entertains. So, you know, what are you trying to do, and to whom and why? And then those are the things that add to the nuance. Like when I worked in public relations, my journalist friends always used to say, "Oh, you've gone to the dark side," because I wasn't, you know, doing the, you know, fair and balanced communication. I was working for somebody, and my job was to help, you know, get their message out to the media and to our stakeholders. And when I was doing corporate work, you know, get people to buy our products and subscribe to our ideas. So I still use the same, it's my passion. Like I still use those same ideas. And when I was in grad school, I had cultivated this sort of, you know, professional bulk of expertise. And then, you know, I was studying education as an adult educator, and most of my doctoral studies were in human resources and organizational development. I was still interested in people and how they understood things and how they worked in the world and how they built networks and social systems. And that's all relevant to human resources and organizational development as well. But when it came time to do my dissertation, I didn't want to do like human resource management or necessarily training, although that's what I'm doing now for work. And so I said to my I had to find a way to marry communications and education. And so I said to my doctoral committee, can we believe that people learn from the media? And of course, I had been an influencer in the media for a decade and a half by then. And they said, yeah, we'll believe that people learn from the media. And then I said, okay, then couldn't we study, having been a media strategist, I said, then couldn't we study the construction of media messaging the way we study curriculum design? And they said, oh, yeah, maybe there are, you know, people who actually do shape those messages. It's not just that the journalists go out and, you know, and just come up with this stuff. They get information from somewhere, and people influence that information, of course. I've been doing that. And so the title of my dissertation was The Other Side of Media Literacy: How Power Relations and Interests Shape Television News. And so by looking at who stories get told and how and why those stories get told, I was able to use a theoretical model of academic program planning and apply it to media as a means of education. And then I looked at, you know, who are those power brokers? Who are those players? And how do those stories make their way down to people like my racist grandmother, people like my mother? Like I say, my grandmother lived 6 blocks from the Detroit city limits, and she was a racist and my inspiration. Not because I'm a racist, but because my grandmother believed what she saw on television. And I know that there are so many people, including myself, who believe what we see on TV. And even though, you know, those of us who do this work know that that's not always truth and reality, sometimes we don't know what else to think. Like I told you, I was excited about the opportunity to go to Afghanistan, and I got scared that first time and I withdrew. I'm a human being, and we all, you know, we all have these, it's, you know, when it's, we all are hungry for information and want to know how to navigate the world. So that's what we have. People ask me, like, what's a good news source and how do I get good information? Well, there's no such thing. There's bias in everything. There's even bias in language, that we have to use language to communicate concepts is a flawed protocol. There's no such thing as a completely unbiased news source. C-SPAN might be the closest to it. But, you know, the best you can do is to aggregate your information, get it from a variety of sources, and use your critical mind.
It's amazing. There's someone else that's going to have a question. I just want to make a quick comment. It's amazing how we evolve from different viewpoints and perspectives to where we are now.
I'm not sure.
All right, thank you, Steve.
Okay. We can talk more, Steve. I know where to find you.
I know that a few folks were really interested to hear in your experience in Myanmar, especially in relation to if you had any, potential moral qualms or moral quandaries while working in Myanmar.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I guess I sort of got derailed in my conversation. After I was driving around the country with my dog for a year, I started working as an independent consultant, and that's when I was doing working with the Ministry of Education, Science, and Technology in Kosovo, with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. That was in 2017, and then also, like I said, was a first responder as a disaster services volunteer for the American Red Cross with Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And then in 2018, I had a Fulbright award, and I went to Myanmar again as a ministerial advisor. And I worked in the Ministry of Social Welfare, Relief, and Resettlement mere weeks after the United Nations and the US Department of State independently corroborated reports of the Myanmar military's, they accused them of genocide against the Rohingyas. So I was a little concerned going there so quickly after that. And so when I asked the folks at the embassy how to handle that, they said, just go, you're there to teach leadership, communication, and basic disaster response. So just go teach and let us know if you have any trouble. And the people who I worked with in the ministry were mostly junior staff officers, and they didn't really share. We didn't really talk about a lot of it. There were some people who I made friends with, and then I'd say like, well, so what's your understanding of what happened? And is the United States really, the United States or the international community, like, are they really wrong? Is your military killing the Rohingya people? And they said, well, it's kind of complicated. And this is one of my friends from the United Nations said, we think this is the first time in history that a Nobel Peace Prize winner is now implicated in genocide. Like, what the heck? But that's, Aung San Suu Kyi she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. So what the heck? But they said, okay, so here's the situation. The Rohingya people are not legitimate citizens of Myanmar. This is what they told me. This is their perspective. They said, and we didn't allow those researchers into the country, so we don't know who they were talking to and whose stories they were saying. If they were talking to the Rohingya over in Bangladesh, then, of course they've got an axe to grind. And those were biased stories, so you can't believe that. And then they said, well, and since the Rohingya, though they've been living in the country for decades, they aren't actually citizens, so they don't deserve the same rights as everyone else. And they attacked us first. They said they attacked that police station, and so we were just fighting back. And I was thinking, like, these stories are kind of preposterous, considering, what I believed. I'm inclined to believe the US Department of State and the United Nations. And then I thought, what if some independent country came to the United States and said, like, you can't treat people the way that you think is good and true and right? I think that the American people would say, like, who are you, France, to be telling us how to run our country? Stay out of our sovereign business. So I understood why they were saying what they were, but I think they were woefully ill-informed, and I think that was on purpose.
All right, maybe we have one last question from Peter Smith.
Peter Smith.
Is that your colleague?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were advisors together in Afghanistan, and are still good friends. Kim, I missed the very first portion of your talk, so maybe you already did this, but if not, can you cite like an example or two from recent, crises in the world where public opinion you think was very effectively tracked and informed? You know, in other words, real cases of successful public opinion management efforts.
Yeah, well, the one that comes to mind most immediately is, I mean, nothing's going to be perfect or great, but we did a really good job in Hurricane Harvey compared to, for instance, Hurricane Katrina.
Okay.
We, the Red Cross, and even the news media who were working on Hurricane Harvey did they were using Katrina as a model. Like, you know, they cut their teeth on Katrina, and we were doing a lot of the things that we were talking about. I forgot who asked the question that we were talking about earlier. Like, we were getting in front of messages. We knew who the stakeholders were and what the problems were. We were able to talk to problems before they blew up. We had good, ready responses for a lot of the criticisms that the Red Cross has taken in the past, and I think we did a really, really good job in Hurricane Harvey. Relatively.
That's interesting. In one of the programs we do in the consulting things in maritime security, we actually use the examples of Katrina and the effort to deal with Deepwater Horizon as to show a real contrast between a poorly executed opinion management effort and one that was very well done. And the Deepwater Horizon one, I think, close to the way you described Harvey, took advantages of all these lessons learned the hard way during Katrina.
For sure, yeah. And I've got a friend who's a biogeochemist at UGA, and she had some rapid response grants from NOAA, and she was responding. She was the one who discovered the media were saying, like, where's all the oil? If this is such a bad oil spill, then where's all the oil? And she said, it's at the bottom of the ocean. And NOAA was saying, you know, well, how can that be? Oil floats. And she said, not when you mix it with surfactants. It doesn't float. And this is going to be a big problem later. And yeah. She was getting inundated with calls. When I talked to her, she said, my 3-year-old just hung up on CNN. I'm like, don't let your 3-year-old answer the phone. Like, that's a no-go. But, you know, I'm a little disagreeing with you only because my friend had such a bad reaction with the media. And yes, Deepwater Horizon was a much better response than Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina was just horrible all around.
Yeah, and we, you know, kind of between law enforcement and the military and civilian government, a lot of lessons learned from Katrina have affected. We have a whole system called the Incident Command System that is kind of an on-the-shelf system for when we have a disaster, and it deals with, you know, all the necessities like logistics, first aid, all that kind of stuff. Right. But also a huge part of it's devoted to the information side, and a lot of that's because Katrina was such a disaster. Yeah.
I didn't know that that's Department of Homeland Security and FEMA, right? That runs that.
Yeah, that is it comes under them. Yeah, but it's something that's utilized really by all different security forces. It's kind of just driven by the type of incident that is taking place.
Yeah, for those of you who care, they offer classes online for free. Go to the FEMA website, so you can go learn about not just communications response, but like Pete said, you know, incident response and working with police and other agencies who are involved in disasters and crises. Thank you.
Okay, to close it off, we had one more question on kind of like how will our sense making be affected in the near future as we're switching from traditional and to TV to kind of almost everyone being a journalist with a smartphone. You know, so how does that affect our sense making? And then if I may kind of squeeze one in, I think, you know, like I very much, you know, kind of like appreciate your perspective on, you know, that we can't really maybe kind of like maybe transfer too much from one disaster, from one crisis to the next. But I think, you know, in the spirit of trying to build kind of like more resilient institutions for, you know, potential future catastrophes, do you think that there's any capacity that we're currently lacking, either nationally or globally, that we should be building up to more effectively kind of respond either in communication or really crisis management to future disasters?
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, they're both true. You know, there's every disaster or crisis is unique. And there are also some, you know, like we were saying, some best practices, there's some lessons learned that can be extrapolated and applied from one to the other. So they're both true at the same time. I was sort of talking about that earlier where, you know, I wouldn't have a job if there wasn't a need for, you know, someone who had some body of knowledge and understanding, and then, you know, could come in and say, okay, well, this is how you could do it, or these are the, you know, the levers you push. So, you know, what's the question? What can we do in the future to help make sure?
Yeah, given that, you know, this won't be the current COVID-19 crisis won't be the last crisis, at least, that we're having. Is there anything, you know, any general capacity that you currently see lacking, either nationally or internationally, that we should be building up to more effectively respond to future crises?
More critical thinking. I saw a bumper sticker when I lived in North Carolina, and it said, "The other federal deficit, critical thinking skills." So yeah, more media literacy, I think, would be a really great thing. Spokespersons who are able to respond quickly, but also knowledgeably. It's hard to say, you know, infrastructure wise. I don't know if you're asking about like technology. Do we need better television stations, or, you know, more social media, or,
no,
you know,
more in terms of like, if you look at the roles that you know, that are currently existing in terms of crisis response and crisis communication, you know, do you think that there's specific bottlenecks, you know, roles or capacities that governments nationally or internationally could be filling to kind of like get ahead of the curve to respond better to future crises?
Yeah.
So let me jump in. I was asking a question. I got an example that really resonated me is when there were the terrorist attacks in Mumbai several years ago. Mm-hmm. And you had the standard media presenting what they understood to be going on, but then you had the Twitter world with times 1,000 people on the ground blowing up the internet with real-time information. Yeah. And it was amazing. I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable.
Yeah,
that's really crazy.
That's what I was saying about social media. Like, it's awesome and it's horrible. Like, you can turn it into, I've been reading a lot on Twitter, and I'm like, who are these stupid people? And if you don't know, shut up, because you're polluting the air for people who are confused, who are ignorant, you know, like my poor mother. Like, if my mom had access to Twitter, oh my God, she'd be calling me every day. On the other hand, without Twitter, without social media, we wouldn't have Black Lives Matter. We wouldn't have Occupy Wall Street. We wouldn't have the, what was the, I just left my mind, the, in the Middle East, the revolution in Egypt.
Arab Spring?
The Arab Spring. You know, we wouldn't have the Me Too movement, all these people who are able to have a voice and to be seen, because now there's a platform for them. So I don't think you can have one without the other. You can't give a voice to everybody and say, you know, but only the smart people can talk. So it's that's the great democratizer with social media, and it's a wonderful and a cursed thing. So I think, you know, the answer to that, this is the media literacy advocate in me says, the answer to that is, let's learn how to be better consumers of information, and let's become informed. Let's find out what's going on in the world, and let's care, because those things are what's going to propel us to find the things that are good and true and right and important to us. And those are the things that are going to help us make the best decisions for our family, and to vote in a way that makes sense for us. And then, you know, in a democracy, we get the world that we have cultivated. You know.
All right, that's a very nice closing appeal. And I think, you know, this is, I mean, I'm seeing those salons as a very kind of like attempt, at least, you know, to kind of like, to me, it was my first response to COVID-19, where I was like, what the hell is going on? I see a few people talking about it. How can we kind of like try to sense make better around this? And I think, yeah, I mean, it's definitely an ongoing process. But hey, I cannot thank you enough for coming, and I can't thank you enough for going over time. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your incredible questions. I thought it was, I mean, I think we really barely scratched the surface, and the hour definitely passed for me like it was like 2 minutes or so. It's really quite amazing. I think you're very, I mean, I think you're, one can tell that you're an incredible communicator just in the way that you're relating. It's been very very well conveyed, very compassionate, and I think, yeah, it was a very nice salon. Thank you very much for joining. And yeah, I'm hoping it won't be the last time that we had you. Thank you so much.
I told Steve, but I told one of my ex-boyfriend works for Apple, and I said, I'm down here, and I just sometimes get so frustrated with the Army, and there's all this innovation going up in Silicon Valley. And he said, let me tell you about the Foresight Institute. And so I came to the Vision Weekend and met Steve, and we were talking, and I said I must be involved with these folks. So I hope that this is just the start.
I hope so too. Man, I'll definitely take that up as an invitation and being in touch again.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for joining. Bye, everyone.
Bye.